I want you to imagine stepping onto like a peeling wooden dinghy. You know, the kind that looks like it's been rotting on a beach for a decade.
Oh, yeah, just totally falling apart.
Right. And you fully expect to be bailing water within, what, 5 minutes? You brace yourself for a miserable, terrifying ride because you know every single little wave is going to threaten your life.
It's a horrible feeling.
It is. But here's the crazy part. What if you are actually standing at the helm of a billion-dollar state-of-the-art nuclear submarine, yet you're curled up crying in the corner because you are just entirely convinced you're in a leaky rowboat?
That is quite the visual.
Well, that illusion, that massive, tragic disconnect between what we actually are and what we think we are, is exactly what we're dismantling today. We're exploring a translated spiritual address that completely reframes human capacity in the face of absolute chaos. So, okay, let's unpack this because it's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. And what's fascinating here is that the author of this text uses this incredibly vivid, extended maritime metaphor to look at our inner lives. And I should say, it is not just a motivational speech.
Right, it's not just a poster on a wall.
Exactly. It does not just pat you on the back and say, hang in there, the storm will pass. It actually functions as a highly structured, almost technical manual for spiritual resilience.
Manual, yeah.
It completely validates that overwhelming panic you feel when life goes sideways. But then it pivots to detailing exactly how to operate this high-tech ship you are supposedly captaining, giving these really actionable strategies to keep the vessel in peak condition.
Which is so needed. And I want to get right into the hardware of this ship, what the text calls the blueprint, because the central tension here is just so universally relatable.
Oh, absolutely.
The author points out how often we use that small rubber boat mentality as a literal shield. When we fail or when we collapse under pressure, we essentially say, well, that's just my nature. I'm just a dinghy. I'm meant to be tossed around by the universe.
Yeah, it is a profound defense mechanism, really. I mean, think about the psychology behind that.
Right.
If you convince yourself and everyone around you, frankly, that you are just a fragile rubber boat, you are instantly absolved of any expectation.
Because no one asks a dinghy to cross the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly. It protects us from the terrifying responsibility of our own potential. But the text argues that this is fundamentally a mistaken self-perception. You are operating a vessel entirely designed by a divine creator, and it is fully equipped for deep, treacherous waters.
Let me push back on that, though. Because if the blueprint is so flawless, right, and we are supposedly these incredibly advanced ships, why is my default setting, and frankly, the default setting for most people I know, self-deprecation?
That's a very fair question.
Like, why do we immediately downgrade our self-worth the second a trial hits? And I guess, how does this text suggest we actually rewire that response?
Well, we default to self-deprecation because it's familiar, right? And it demands nothing of us. But to rewire that, the source argues we have to radically change our internal questioning during a crisis.
Change the questions we ask ourselves.
Yes. When the waves are crashing over the deck and the alarms are blaring, the default human response is to scream, "Why me? Like, why is this happening to my ship?"
Which usually just leads to a massive spiral of victimhood.
Precisely. You just get stuck there. But the text urges us to ask a totally different question, which is, what is this trial for?
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is. It shifts the narrative from being a victim of random weather to being a captain in a calibration exercise. It is all about accepting what the text calls our divine nature.
So the storm has a purpose.
Right. When you choose to see yourself through the lens of a divine blueprint, the storm actually becomes a testing ground to cultivate love and what the source calls pure gifts. You stop viewing the storm as a meaningless punishment and start viewing it as the exact resistance your ship needs to test its whole integrity.
Okay, so the storm is the proving ground. I like that. And here's the thing. A strong hull doesn't do you any good if you don't actually know how to steer through the waves.
No, you just drift.
Yeah. So the text moves from this physical blueprint to the software, the autopilot.
Yeah.
And this is where it introduces this concept of the Holy Ghost, or the constant invitation of revelation, as an advanced automatic navigation system.
Yeah, so if the blueprint is what you are, the autopilot is how you move through the world. The author is really suggesting that we have a constant internal sensor feeding us navigational data.
And the metric the source uses for this sensor is wild to me. It outlines a training principle it calls the 9-10 rule.
This is a great part.
It is. The text claims that if you listen to that very first gentle prompting, that internal nudge 9 out of 10 times, you will do the right thing. But if you ignore it 9 out of 10 times, you will deeply regret it.
It's a bold claim.
It's so bold. I read that and immediately felt kind of skeptical,
Yeah.
90%. How can the text possibly justify trusting a random, fleeting gut feeling 90% of the time? How do we know that isn't just massive confirmation bias?
Well, I mean, it sounds really high until you look at the mechanics of how we usually process those promptings. The text illustrates this by showing how the rational brain usually fights the spiritual autopilot.
Right, because logic steps in.
Exactly. The autopilot operates on intuition and divine foresight, which rarely comes with, like, a spreadsheet of logical proofs. The author grounds this in a very intense anecdote about a man receiving a devastating cancer diagnosis.
Right, which is basically the ultimate storm hitting your ship.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But instead of the expected sheer panic, his autopilot provided a profound, immediate sense of peace. He received this distinct, undeniable feeling that all will be well long before he had any medical outcomes or treatment plans or survival rates.
Before any of the data was there.
Right. The autopilot was essentially giving him a weather report of calm before the storm had even passed over him. It completely preloaded his resilience.
And then the text contrasts that preloaded piece with the danger of letting our logic override the system, right?
Yes, through a story about the pain of ignoring the censor. It details the deep regret someone felt after dismissing a really gentle prompting to go make a late-night visit to a sister in need.
Oh, I've done that so many times.
We all have. Think about the rationalizations that happen in that moment. You tell yourself, oh, it's too late, she's probably asleep, I'm tired. It's just my own weird thought, not a divine instruction.
Yeah, just talk yourself out of it entirely.
Exactly. They rationalized the prompt away and missed a crucial, time-sensitive opportunity to help someone who was actually suffering.
So if you are listening to this right now, I really want you to think about your own daily commute or just, walking through the grocery store. How often does your brain fire off a gentle impulse to take a different route or text an old friend out of the blue or just stay completely quiet during an argument with your partner?
Oh, that last one is tough.
It is. But how quickly do you swat that impulse away as random noise because it is slightly inconvenient? The text is explicitly telling us that that tiny impulse is the high-tech autopilot trying to steer you away from unseen rocks.
And learning to trust that gentle censor is not a one-time decision. It is an active, daily recalibration.
Right. So I see how the internal mechanisms work here. We accept the high-tech blueprint, and we follow the 910 autopilot rule. But a ship with great software and a solid hull is still going nowhere if it is constantly fighting the ocean current. Which brings us to the external environment. And honestly, here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where my mind was completely blown by the text. It makes this incredibly bold assertion about how we interact with the water around us, which the text says represents other people in God's love.
Yes, the water channel.
Yeah. And it claims that answers to our deepest prayers often do not come while we are actively praying.
Which completely upends the traditional paradigm, for most people.
Totally.
Most people imagine prayer as a very static transaction. You sit in a quiet, dark room, you send up a verbal request, and you essentially wait for a feeling or a thought to just drop into your head like a delivery.
Like an Amazon package or something.
Yeah.
But the author is saying the answers actually arrive when you are actively working for the Lord and serving others. You get the divine answer while your hands are busy, not while they are perfectly folded in a quiet room. I really need you to explain the physics of that, based on the text metaphor.
Well, the author uses this concept of a water channel. For a massive ship to maximize its speed and maneuverability, it literally cannot be fighting the flow of the ocean. It has to align with the current.
Okay, that makes sense physically.
Right. And in this framework, the water is God's love. When we sit isolated in our own anxiety, we are just floating on top of the water, bobbing up and down. But by actively serving others, we physically place ourselves into the current of that love. We become a funnel.
Like a conduit.
A conduit, yes. But a conduit only works if something is actually flowing through it. If water isn't moving through a funnel, it is literally just a strangely shaped bucket.
That's a great way to put it.
When you serve, you open the valve. And when that divine love flows through you to reach someone else, you are intrinsically connected to the source. That is the exact moment the autopilot's instructions become crystal clear.
And the text gives this beautiful, incredibly simple example of what opening that valve looks like. Because I think people hear service and they get overwhelmed.
Oh, they think it has to be a grand gesture.
Right. But it doesn't demand you sell all your possessions and move to a remote village. The author literally uses the example of simply bringing sunflowers to someone who is suffering.
A deeply mundane act.
Mundane, yes, but think about the physicality of it. If you are stuck in that why me rubber boat mentality, your posture is looking straight down in the bottom of your own boat, right? You're just watching the water leak in. You are consumed by your own structural failures.
You're completely inward focused.
Exactly. But the act of buying sunflowers, driving to someone's house, and handing them over forces you to look up at the horizon. The text explicitly notes that this tiny external act of service fractures our self-centered perspective. It brings immense joy because it forces us into the current.
But, and this is key, staying in that current requires energy. You cannot be a massive conduit or run complex navigation systems if your engines are dead. You need what the source calls lamp oil or high-precision fuel.
Right. We're moving to the engine room now. And the author draws on the ancient parable of the wise virgins storing oil for their lamps to survive the night.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the core lesson of that parable, which the text really emphasizes, is that this high-precision fuel cannot be crowdsourced or bought at the last minute.
You can't just borrow it.
No. When the hurricane hits, you cannot borrow someone else's structural integrity. The fuel is gathered drop by drop deliberately before the weather turns.
The text gets very specific here, too, pointing to things like scripture study, Sabbath observance, and keeping covenants. Now, for someone who isn't steeped in theological jargon, terms like sacred ordinances and covenants can sound really heavy, maybe even alienating.
Oh, absolutely. They can sound very inaccessible.
Let's translate that. What is the actual psychological or spiritual mechanism happening here?
Okay, think of a covenant as a highly intentional, binding commitment. It is the difference between vaguely hoping you'll be a good person today and signing a definitive behavioral contract with the divine.
Okay, I like that.
When the text talks about ordinances, it means the physical rituals we use to cement those commitments in our minds and spirits.
So it's essentially about identity reinforcement.
Exactly. When you actively participate in these routines, you are neurologically and spiritually mapping a route back to a core truth. You are heavily myelinating a pathway in your brain and spirit. You are preloading your stress response.
That's fascinating. But the text gives a very blunt warning about how we approach these rituals, specifically the weekly sacrament meetings. It warns against treating it as a passive experience, just, sitting there listening to someone else say a prayer over bread and water.
Because sitting passively in a pew is the equivalent of tying your ship to the fuel dock and never actually putting the hose in the tank.
You're just sitting next to the fuel.
Right. The author states we must use that specific time as an active opportunity to, and this is a quote, dig deeply upon the rock of the Savior and absorb living water.
So, mechanically speaking, how does someone actually do that?
It means actively reflecting on that binding commitment we discussed. It means bringing your specific failures from the week to that moment, analyzing them, and consciously drawing on that spiritual authority, what the text calls priesthood power, to reset your trajectory.
So it's work.
It is intense work. It is an active synthesis of your life and your divine blueprint. And if you do that week after week, you build a massive reserve of high-precision fuel. So when the storm hits, your brain doesn't have to scramble to manufacture hope from scratch, because the pathway to peace is already paved and illuminated.
Okay, I am really visualizing this entire ship now. We have acknowledged the indestructible blueprint of the hull. We are trusting the 9-10 rule of the autopilot to steer. We are serving others to align with the ocean's current. And we are actively fueling the engines through intentional commitments. By all accounts, this ship should be completely unsinkable, just slicing through the roughest waters.
It really should.
But the text adds one final critical reality check.
Yeah, because you can have perfect hardware, perfect software, and a full tank of gas. But if your cargo hold is packed floor to ceiling with garbage, your ship is going to sit dangerously low in the water.
Every minor wave is going to wash over the deck.
Exactly.
Discarding unnecessary cargo. I have to say, this part felt like the author had been observing my daily habits.
I think we all felt that way.
Because it specifically targets things we consider totally benign. It explicitly calls out harmless-seeming, mindless media scrolling. But let me play devil's advocate for the listener here. Is the text demanding toxic productivity? Are we supposed to be these hyper-efficient spiritual machines 24/7? Like, what is fundamentally wrong with just unplugging, zoning out on the couch, and watching random videos after a brutal day? How do we differentiate between necessary mental rest and hoarding unnecessary cargo?
This raises an important question, right? And the distinction the text makes is entirely about intentionality and the reality of finite resources. True rest is intentional. It actually replenishes your energy. Mindless scrolling, on the other hand, is a deceptive activity. It feels like rest because your body is still. But mentally and spiritually, it is demanding constant sensory processing. It is taking up massive amounts of space and weight without offering any nutritional or structural value to your ship.
It's like having a computer that keeps crashing, and instead of figuring out why, you just keep opening more background tabs. You think you're looking at fun stuff, but you're just eating up all the RAM.
That is the perfect modern equivalent. To fix this, the text advises a deeply practical physical exercise. It suggests making a literal do-not-do list.
The do not do list.
Writing down the specific things you will not pour your limited time and energy into, and then prayerfully deleting them from your routine.
It's so funny because we obsess over our to-do lists. We constantly look for new productivity hacks to cram more tasks onto our plates. But we almost never map out the extraction process. We rarely identify the dead weight.
Because identifying dead weight requires really uncomfortable honesty, but the why behind this is the most important part. The author isn't telling you to stop scrolling because leisure is evil. They are telling you to stop because your ship has a finite cargo limit.
You can only carry so much.
Right. If your hold is jammed full of mindless distraction, you literally do not have the bandwidth to hear the gentle promptings of the autopilot. You don't have the energy to notice the person who needs those sunflowers. You are burning your high-precision fuel just to carry garbage across the ocean.
So if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're driving, maybe you're doing the dishes, I want you to audit your own cargo hold. If you were forced to write a do-not-do list today, to stop your ship from sitting so low in the water, what is the absolute first thing that flashes into your mind? What is the one harmless-seeming habit that you secretly know is just eating up your RAM and weighing down your vessel?
And you have to identify it.
Right. Identifying it is the only way you can physically pick it up and throw it overboard.
And tossing it overboard is what creates the space for the best things, as the text calls them.
Looking at this entire framework, it is just incredible how logically it all connects. I mean, it moves sequentially from the core of who we are to how we interact with the world. First, recognizing that we are built with a divine blueprint and actively refusing to hide behind the excuse of being a fragile dinghy.
Right.
Then, learning to actually trust the navigation system, acting on those first gentle impulses instead of rationalizing them away. From there, we have to interact with the environment, becoming a conduit for divine love by getting our hands dirty with small acts of service, which ironically is how we get our own prayers answered.
It's a beautiful cycle.
It is. And we sustain that effort by intentionally drawing fuel from our commitments and rituals rather than just passively observing them. And finally, we ruthlessly protect our bandwidth by throwing the empty distractions overboard.
And when you combine all of those mechanics, the ultimate promise of this text is remarkably profound. The author asserts that if you engage in these daily trainings, you are doing far more than just surviving a chaotic ocean. You are structurally anchoring your life.
It's a fundamental shift.
Exactly. The promise isn't that the storms will stop. The storms are guaranteed. But the promise is that when the sky goes dark and the wind hits, your internal experience will be completely different. Instead of the desperate panic of someone trapped in a leaky boat, you will experience a deeply rooted, unshakable sense of security. You will have the quiet confidence of a captain who knows exactly what their ship is capable of, allowing you to safely navigate toward your eternal port.
It fundamentally changes the storm from an existential threat into just another stretch of water you were literally built to sail through. Before we let you go, I want you to think back to that rubber boat mentality and pair it with the friction we discussed around the 9-10 rule. What if the real reason you are ignoring that gentle prompting to do something courageous or kind today isn't because you're too busy, and it isn't because you're too tired? What if it's because you are still secretly pretending you're just a dinghy, and you're just terrified of the open water? What exact action would you take in the next hour if you fully accepted that you were a high-tech ship, entirely designed for the deep? Keep exploring that horizon, and we will see you on the next deep dive.